Do you see a possibility of what one might call a big war between major powers in the world in the next 20, 30 years?
Yes, I do. And I see it as a possibility if we don't learn the lessons of history. So the bad news is that it's very complicated, and there are two major hotspots and there are other smaller ones. We never know what will tip it off, but the good news is that we can learn from history. We do know what's happened before, and we've learned a great deal since the end of World War II. The UN, all of its structures around it has helped us prevent conflict. We know almost everything we need to do to prevent conflict. It's a question of having the political will to do it.
And I mean, to people like me who just think it's inconceivable because we're too sensible now to do these kind of silly things and to let one thing lead to another and to trigger a war when we would surely sit down and just sort it out.
That's not what human beings do, is it?
Right.
I mean, if you look through history, you know, people make mistakes. People get angry. They often misinterpret. We've seen many occasions where something's happened and then there's been an overreaction.
Overreaction. Well, James Jeffrey, I'm interested in, do you basically agree with what Patricia has just said there?
Only partially. The reason we haven't seen a return to the first half of the awful 20th century is that during and after World War II, the United States and European partners, added by countries around the world since then, have created a global collective security system with financial, trade, rule of law, and other aspects. But at the center is collective security that won the Cold War and was dealing with regional problems such as Saddam and Milosevic since 1989. Now, however, we see the rise of Russia and China who want to challenge that system and to some degree are cooperating with regional actors such as North Korea and Iran. The whole complex of threats taken together is quite formidable.
Sorry, so you're saying that you kind of would link the different things, the sort of the North Korea situation, the jostling between the big powers, these are all linked in your view? I mean, you think there's almost not a conspiracy against the West, but that people are organizing with a mind to weakening the West?
There's no overall battle plan that Beijing and Moscow have agreed on. They have commonality of interest in undercutting this American security system because it stands in the way of their alternative system, which you people in Europe understand from the 19th century. It's great powers expanding their influence until they run into another great power. That's exactly what led to World War I and World War II. Thus, we've tried over the past 70 years to find a different way forward. They're now challenging that, and that's, even though they don't coordinate on every single issue, there's a high degree of commonality in their UN votes to block action against North Korea or Iran, and in the way that, be it the South China Sea or be it the Baltics, they challenge this order.
Brian Lord, you better tell us whether you believe a kind of a big war is a possibility or whether you're on the more optimistic end.
I think a single big war is highly unlikely. I think what we are seeing, I think I would agree that what we are seeing is a challenge of traditional Western approach to the world. But what we also are living through a world is where the rigidity of borders is being broken down by technology, trade, communication. The availability of information is now no longer as controlled as it has. As you say, we have an increasingly bellicose North Korea. We've got Russia playing its normal geopolitical games, whether that is in virtual real space, whether it's in cyberspace, and we have a White House which is at the very least perceived from the outside to be unusual and certainly unpredictable. What I would say is the risk of a miscalculation is extremely real, and a miscalculation is probably in effect has the same effect as a real conflict.
And Patricia made that point as well, so it's worth bearing in mind. Of course, war may itself be very different, and so as an expert on cybersecurity, one of the things we need to think about is not thinking about what it looks like in 20th century terms, but potentially is cyber the kind of the form it takes in the 21st century?
I don't think it's as binary as that. I think what you have is the ability for states to be able to use activity online to be able to exert geopolitical effect all the way through to destructive effect. I think one of the areas for miscalculation is we're looking at an area of the world where there are still no rules of engagement. The ability to confuse is still very high. The ability to hide or deceive or put whosever's fingerprints you want on activity is very high. The lack of understanding by a public about what a cyber attack means, the lack of understanding of an adversary's capability in a way which is different from conventional capability, all plays into this confusion, which if people want to make a miscalculation or want to give the impression of making a miscalculation, just continues to increase the risk.
Patricia, to me it would look like North Korea is in a different category to all the other risks, more than the Middle East, because North Korea, there's an unaccountable dictator. It's not even like the former Soviet Union. It's not like there's a system of which he's a part. He is just what he wants to be, right? And he's got nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles.
Well, he's not the only one with nuclear weapons, and he actually doesn't have them yet. He has the ballistic missiles, but as far as we're aware, he's not yet got to the point where he can mate the missiles with the warhead, or at least we hope not. Right. So there's still a bit of time to play for there. He is different. North Korea is different as a country. It doesn't have any friends. It has many enemies, and they're very unpredictable. We can't understand what they're going to do. But I would say now in the Middle East, it's very unpredictable, and we have the West coming up against Russia in front to front. Right in the middle of a battle space. And as Brian said, it's got cyberspace in there as well. It's another set of tools. We have turmoil in the Middle East, in the Gulf. We have Israel still. Don't forget that. You know, it's a very potent
And
mix.
all of these could be the Serbias and the
Exactly.
triggers for things. James Jeffrey, I'm just interested in your take on North Korea, because do you see it as slightly different to some of the other risks? Because the potential for massive harm is there if they get the final formula for nuclear weapons?
It is the most immediate crisis, and it is very, very dangerous because it does have nuclear weapons, and it can at least strike with nuclear and conventional weapons the civilian population of South Korea. So yes, it's special. On the other hand, it's not something in and of itself, say like Saddam's Iraq or Milosevic's Serbia, 10, 15 years ago. This is a country that is enabled by China. I disagree it doesn't have friends. Its long-range missiles are now mobile, which is very threatening because they're on Chinese trucks. Those trucks are not something they had 30 years ago. They're recent additions. The Chinese are enabling in many different ways the North Koreans basically to use them as a chess piece against the United States and the Western Pacific. And that's a real danger to us and to the entire region, including ultimately the Chinese.